When it comes to climate change, it's safe to say we have entered a decade of last resort. 8 critical years to make the difference needed to avoid catastrophe. That's innovation, policy, investment at the governmental scale, individual responsibility like we've never seen, and of course, brands must rise to the occasion too, with reimagined products, operations, and customer experiences. It's something we've watched brands chip away at with innovations like refillable packaging or even packaging that dissolves or is edible. Some brands marching aggressively towards carbon neutrality. However, most organizations are content to remain on the sidelines, at best middling in their efforts. Why is that? Our next speaker has a powerful hypothesis as to why. She suggests we shouldn't be so hard on ourselves, we just need new tools to rise to the occasion. Anab Jain is co-founder of Superflux, where she directs future-forward explorations, realistic simulations designed to help companies and organizations experience the future implications of decisions brands make or don't make today. From climate change to autonomy to the future of work, her projects aim to confront today's most complex and deeply interconnected challenges. It's my pleasure to welcome Anab Jain to the Reimagine stage.
This is my family's food ration card. These were common in the early 1980s in India, where I grew up. It lists my parents, my sister, and myself. India had suffered from a severe drought, and a large number of the country's population had such ration cards for key subsistence items. Life was frugal, to say the least. Now, I can walk into my local market and buy almost anything. But I'm grateful that my mother saved this card. Whilst we are fortunate of what we have today, it's a stark reminder of a very different reality not so long ago, and a future that is closer than we might think. If food rationing probably didn't happen to your family, my story might not move you in the same way it motivates me. For my story to make you feel as acutely concerned about food insecurity as I do, it would have to more effectively and realistically immerse you in the narrative, make you feel part of the story. But how could I do that? What if I changed the story? Could I make it feel more personally urgent? Like the pandemic, Russia's war with Ukraine is something we are all experiencing. Whether it's the price of petrol, videos of bombed out cities, or horrific images of human suffering, the whim of an autocrat has placed much of the world in danger and put food insecurity back in the headlines, as a lot of the world's grain and fertilizer are also caught up in the conflict. We all know that war is complex, and we will never fully understand the geopolitical decisions over the last decades that have led to this one. But I could ask you if you think something should be done about this, if you feel compelled to do something about this personally. I don't have to. I've seen so many of us have already opened our wallets and marched in the streets. We feel immersed in the story of the war. Its consequences feel imminent. There's nothing at all that feels abstract. That is because the story is both close enough and the consequences feel real enough to effectively place yourself in the narrative in a relevant and perhaps actionable way. Why is it then when we hear headlines like the UN is saying we have only 8 years left to prevent irreversible damage to our climate, it feels as if big businesses, marketers, and the brands they represent fail to fully grasp the implications? Never mind taking meaningful action at the scale necessary to avoid global catastrophe. Why are we failing? Today, I'm going to make the argument that brands are consistently making harmful mistakes, not because of a lack of information, data, or knowledge, but because of a failure to harness the power of imagination to create enough clarity and emotional intensity to take the bold actions that will help the planet survive and our brands thrive. Failure of imagination is defined as an undesirable yet seemingly predictable circumstance which was not planned for. Failure of imagination is what led us to be unprepared for a pandemic. We could not imagine what a pandemic would really feel like and what options should be on the table as a result. Now, it turns out that what causes failure of imagination is us, or what I'd like to call evolutionary asymmetry. In many ways, we are victims of our own progress. Let me explain what I mean by that. Humans have evolved to respond to things we can see, touch, hear, and smell. That's good. It's given us the ability to acquire food and to save ourselves and each other from immediate danger. But we've created a world too vast and complex for our biology to make sense of. The evolutionary processes that have led us to this point have not equipped us with the cognitive tools needed to fully engage with the scale of the problems we currently face. We have created a world that is outpacing our cognitive evolution. This is especially true when it comes to thinking about the future. One way this manifests is in a common cognitive bias known as hyperbolic or temporal discounting. As futurist Jain has written, studies suggest that when you imagine your future self, your brain does something weird. It stops acting as if you're thinking about yourself. Instead, it starts acting as if you're thinking about a completely different person. Essentially, this is a form of nearsightedness that means our evolution favors smaller rewards in the present over bigger ones in the future, because we are not able to imagine ourselves in that future. When coupled with our natural human tendency to disbelieve, minimize, or underestimate threat warnings and the potential adverse effects of disasters, what scientists call the normalcy bias, well, these evolutionary asymmetries really challenge our capacity to imagine alternate futures. So, we have a world that is too complex to comprehend, an evolutionary bias to favor the short term, and a tendency to underestimate threats. No wonder we struggle with climate change. We need to be honest about our weaknesses, take different approaches, and build effective tools. How can we, all of the leaders, thinkers, and doers in this audience, turn this failure of imagination around? And how can brands embrace this idea? I want to take a moment to look at some fascinating brain science once again. Episodic memory is what helps us remember key events of the past. For instance, episodic memories are memories like your first day in school, or your first kiss, or your sibling's graduation. Here's me with my son just before he went to school for the first time. Neuroscientists call this the prospective brain, whose primary function is to use past experiences to anticipate future events. I believe that if we can create experiences that trigger episodic memory, people will be able to experience the future today, and therefore be enabled to visualize themselves within it. Such experiences from the future can be imaginations of alternate worlds, and it is here that we can truly exploit our imagination. We can use our creativity to bring different futures to life today. Futures we can touch, smell, breathe, hear, and feel, so they don't feel so far off. Once visited, these alternate worlds become part of our episodic memory. And then we are able to consider and craft countless possibilities, because such emotional engagement is better suited to our cognitive biology. Imaginative literature already does this so well. So do cinema and the arts. Think 1984 by George Orwell, The Handmaid's Tale, or the BBC series Black Mirror. Stories like this allow us to experience a possible future in visceral and believable ways. And this is precisely what I do, with my partner John Arden in our studio Superflux. Combining art, design, and creativity with scientific rigor and foresight, we bring to life alternative worlds that could be more sustainable, regenerative, and just. We then take people into these possible futures and inhabit them long enough for their episodic memories to take root. We use these speculative tools and, most importantly, imagination to bring many, many different possibilities to life. So we become aware of the choices we have and make more nuanced yet agile decisions. For the last 13 years, we've been doing this work for brands, governments, and cultural organizations. What all of these organizations have in common is a willingness to embrace uncertainty and lean into a clear mission of impactful change that is better for profit, for people, and for the planet. Let me give you an example. In 2017, the government of the United Arab Emirates invited us to help them shape their energy strategy all the way up to 2050. They already had a lot of data about why investing in renewable energy would make sense, but that wasn't helping swing the decisions. So we created this large city model and visualized a host of possible futures on it. As I was excitedly taking a group of government officials and members of energy companies through one sustainable future on our model, a participant told me, "I cannot imagine that in the future people will stop driving cars and start using public transport." We were prepared for this reaction. We had engaged scientists to create samples of what the air will be like in 2030 if our behavior stays the same. It was heavily polluted, a disgusting smelling sulfurous vapor. And so I walked the group over to this object. Just one whiff brought home the point that no amount of data can. This is not the future you want your children to inherit. The next day, the government announced they would be investing billions of dollars in renewables. So while the enormity of climate change remains massive and difficult to conceptualize, the concrete impacts are perhaps less so. A putrid smell needs no brain processing work. It just stinks. And that is how future simulations become part of people's episodic memories. I'll now briefly show how we attempted something similar in another project. Can you imagine what it would be like to live in London in 2050? That's what we did with our work, Mitigation of Shock, and here it is. Following extensive research and prototyping, interviews with experts from NASA, the UK Met Office, and Forum for the Future, we built an entire future London apartment that has been drastically adapted for living with the consequences of climate catastrophe. It is one of Superflux's most ambitious works. We have attempted to make the size and complexity of climate change tangible, relatable, and specific. Those are food computers which we've built from scratch. And look at that book on the shelf. It's called Pets as Proteins. There's a foraging map pinned on the wall and a fox skin is hanging up. Unfamiliar objects, still recognizably London. Often, hope works best alongside tools for proactively tackling future challenges. This is what imagination can do. If we can experience a different, more sustainable world, then it will situate itself in our memories and we are less likely to push it away as preposterous. The storytellers are as crucial as the scientists. The visceral lived experience as powerful as the rational method. I believe that by constructing credible futures, we make future uncertainties become today's choices. We will be motivated to make the changes that we and future generations will rely on. And the power of imagination is available to every business, every brand, everyone who wants to make positive change, for anyone who wants to be a good ancestor. So where do we start? We need to work with the way our evolutionary minds operate. As brand leaders, you already have inherent skills and knowledge that can be leveraged, but I have few suggestions. Number 1, invest in imagination. Slow down to speed up is an age-old mantra. Invest in imagination capabilities for your organization that are not driven by quarterly returns. Number 2, put away wishful thinking and make imagination actionable. Number 3, bring the future closer. Imagining the consequences of today's decisions as if they will happen now brings the future closer. Number 4, time travel into the future. Put yourself in the shoes of someone you love in 2050. What is the future you want them to inhabit? Now, what does your brand need to do to make that story come true? What will happen if you do nothing or the bare minimum? Number 5, create spaces for testing and prototyping alternate future possibilities, where you can effectively ask the question, what does the future require of my brand? In a world where most people live with extremes of weather and economic instability, what products and service will they really care about? To sum up, let's not let a failure of imagination stop us from acting on the urgent challenges we face today. I would like a future where no one here, nor their kids or grandkids, needs a ration card. I believe this future is possible, but we will need to change our methods and respect a different set of tools. As Arundhati Roy said, another world is not only possible, she is on her way. On a quiet day, I can hear her breathing. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That
Thank
was
you.
fantastic. Really
Thank you.
interesting. I love the idea about sniffing polluted air. I thought that really brought
Yeah.
that to life. Hopefully that's not in our future anytime
Yeah,
soon.
I hope so.
Do you have time for a couple questions?
Cool. Yes.
Fantastic. So the first question we have is, how can a brand go about starting to tackle climate change?
Wow, that's a good question. Brands are really good at making complex things simple and creating a loyalty amongst people. So I think they're in a really good position. But I think what they then need to do is to be able to acknowledge the complexity of climate science. And so I think the first thing to do is to start educating themselves about the different complexities of climate science, and then to acknowledge that these could be our realities. But perhaps the most important thing that brands can do is the translation piece, is they can take these complex science graphs and data sets and translate them in stories and narratives in ways that people understand, and they understand themselves. So I think there's a piece of work to be done, but it's possible.
Amazing. So lots ahead still, but it's definitely something we can all tackle.
Yeah.
Great. And there's a second question we have as well. That was, can you give us an example of how brands have accelerated their efforts to tackle climate change?
Some brands have done amazingly well. Last year, we worked extensively with IKEA, or the Inca Group, and they have set a people and planet positive strategy up to 2030. So in a very near-term goal, by 2030, they want their entire business to become circular. And what they've done is they've matched their strategy with communication and innovation. So they're acknowledging that there are going to be hiccups along the way, that we're not going to have this kind of plush life. But by creating stories that matter to people and showing people that by changing their ways through ingenuity and human innovation, they can move forward in a more kind of positive, hopeful way. So I think organizations and brands like IKEA are certainly something to look out for and perhaps learn from.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much. Thank you
you
for your time and for all your wonderful insight. And back to Kansas City.
Thank you.